Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to the Water New Zealand hosting Taumata Arowai. I'm very pleased to be able to say I've got Ray McMillan, Head of Regulatory with us, and Sarah Peacock, Brand Channels Advisor. Yes. So welcome to you both. I've also got in the room Marianne Irving and Noel Roberts from Water New Zealand, but as you can see, the table is only so big and the camera only stretches so wide. So I'm going to hand over to Ray for this webinar. We will take questions at the end. If you can either use the Q&A or the chat function, but we'll take questions at the end, and we're very happy to be able to do that. So if you just bear with me whilst I share a screen. Right.
Kia ora, Gillian. We'll just start with the karakia and the short mihi, and then I'll kick into talking to the presentation that you should have up on the screens in front of you. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. He hia ki ana te tākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Ranganui e tūnei, ko papa tuanuku e ta pōta nei tēnā pōrua. He mihi ana ki te wahi tapu o tēnā rohe. He mihi ana ki ta mana whenua, te whanganui a tāra, te ati awa, ki te mihi. Mihi ana ki te Water New Zealand, ka whakahaere ko Gillian, ngā mihi ki a koe, ngā mihi i ngā whānau o te motu, nau mai whakatau mai ki te hui i tēnei nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good morning. Yes, my name is Ray McMillan. I'm the Head of Regulatory from Taumata Arowai, and we're going to talk through a presentation that will give you an update of where we are in terms of, I guess, establishing the regulatory function for Taumata Arowai, and I guess the drinking water reforms that are currently moving their way through Parliament. And at the end of that, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So if you've got some questions, feel free to send those through. I think Gillian will keep an eye on those, and we'll ask those questions for anyone who sends those through. All right. So just as we get started, we'll cover the role of Taumata Arowai, a little bit of an update on the Water Services Bill, and then the proposed regional structures and the website that we've set up for Taumata Arowai. But before we do that, we'll just have a brief review, I guess, of how we got here in the journey so far. So the three water sector reforms aim to tackle three broad challenges: an ineffective regulatory regime, where a significant portion of New Zealanders can't be sure that what comes out of their taps is safe to drink; a lack of consistent and clear level oversight, a national level oversight, direction and enforcement in the three water system, which does not provide assurance that the wastewater and stormwater systems are delivering outcomes that are acceptable for tangata whenua, our communities and the environment; and an outmoded water service delivery and funding arrangement, which have led to significant infrastructure underinvestment in many places and all too common failures. Rather than a piecemeal solution for these challenges, the government's approach has been a comprehensive, system-wide reform to achieve lasting intergenerational benefits. Minister Mahuta describes this approach as having three main po, and those are the po that are up on your screen now. Early discussions show that initial focus should be on strengthening the regulatory environment and establishing Taumata Arowai. That's been done. The second order of government identified challenges in the current system in providing affordable and equitable access to water services and lifting environmental and safety outcomes. These challenges are expected to be amplified by the economic impact of COVID-19. So I'm here to talk to you about the first two po, the establishment of Taumata Arowai and the strengthened regulatory regime. Currently, the Department of Internal Affairs is discussing the third po, which is the potential reform to council-owned three water services. There's a hui in Whangarei tomorrow, and I'll encourage anyone to attend that workshop and discuss that kaupapa together. It's worth noting, though, that regardless of what the council decides with regards to water services delivery reform, all water service providers will have to meet the standards and work within the system of the first two po that I'm going to talk And I think it's just really important that we remember why and how we got here. So around 800,000 New Zealanders receive drinking water from suppliers that are not regulated. If we just flick to the next slide, thanks, Gillian. I think Havelock North, and this is a sign after Havelock North, it's a sobering reminder of why we're here and the reality that we need to be better at managing our freshwater resources, particularly ensuring everyone in Aotearoa has access to safe drinking water. Okay, the role of Taumata Arowai. Just go to the next slide, please. Yeah. I think what would be really worthwhile, if you haven't done so already, is to look at the Taumata Arowai Water Services Regulator Act 2020 and have a look at the objectives, the functions and the operating principles that are set out in there. If you have a look at sections 10, 11 and 18 of the Act, you'll get a better understanding of who Taumata Arowai is and how we need to operate. The objectives, functions and principles mean that as a regulator, we need to look beyond the four corners of our statute to deliver the outcomes that we are responsible for realising. It also means that as a water sector, we need to be more committed to improving our performance in a collective and coordinated way. So if we go to the next slide. So that's Taumata Arowai and what we'll do. We're established as a Crown entity on the 1st of March 2021. So we're just coming to the end of our first month of operation. The board has been appointed and it met on the 1st of March. Following the official establishment. It's chaired by Dame Karen Patasi. Taumata Arowai's independent board also includes Ricky Allison, Loretta Lovell, Anthony Wilson, Dr. Virginia Hope, Brian Hanna and Troy Brockbank. Some of those names I think will be familiar to anyone in the water sector, but we have a really good range, I guess, of health expertise, water services engineering expertise, Te Ao Māori components in there, as well as people who have sat through the Havelock North experience as well. Appointments to the Māori Advisory Group, we will be able to announce those in the next few weeks, we're hoping. And this is our regulatory landscape. It's quite a busy one. As you can see there, Taumata Arowai is not working alone as a regulator or a policy setting agency in the water services space. Regional councils still have primary responsibility for administering the regulatory frameworks for freshwater, wastewater and stormwater. The policy agency for that remains the Ministry for the Environment. Although regulatory responsibility for drinking water moves to Taumata Arowai, the Ministry of Health has an important role in setting public health criteria and expectations for the drinking water regulatory framework. They also play a key role in leading the public health response when it comes to drinking water emergencies. Taumata Arowai will also be responsible for setting and monitoring and reporting on the performance of wastewater and stormwater systems. Minister Mahuta talks of this as shining the light to ensure that the performance meets our environmental and health expectations. So it's really important that I guess everyone's clear on what Taumata Arowai doesn't do, because there's a lot of moving parts currently in the water services system at the moment, and the three water service reforms are happening at the same time. But Taumata Arowai won't be taking the lead on public health sector incidents or responses. We are not a supplier of safe drinking water, wastewater or stormwater networks or services. We are not the Three Waters Program or lead policy agency. We are not an entity that regulates access to water, including irrigation or land use change projects. We are not an entity that regulates the water bottling industry. We're not a funder of infrastructure or utilities. We're not an economic regulator or policy shop, and we're not amalgamating assets or reforming local government or the water services sector. Okay. So we'll just talk now to the Water Services Bill. And we just keep pushing through there, please, Gillian. So if passed, that's what the bill is intended to do, and that's the commencement of that strengthened regulatory framework. The big caveat is on the bottom there though. It is currently before Select Committee. We've had nearly 1,000 submissions on that, which means there's a lot of debate around some, I guess, contentious areas within the bill, which means it's subject to change. So as much as I would like to tell you that's what is going to be in the bill and that's what we anticipate being the final result, that's up to what comes out of Parliament, and that's currently the process which is happening now. Go to the next slide, please. And if you want to have a look at the bill, and also if you want to access the submissions, that link there on the screen will get you to the bill, and then you'll be able to also get access to the submissions that are put up on the website as well. So the key features of the bill. On that slide in bold, all those who supply water or manage wastewater or stormwater must have a duty of care towards those who may provide that service. And I think that's the key term, a duty of care. So it's not a compliance exercise that you just need to comply with the standards. You actually need to make sure that you continue to provide safe water, and that you take steps necessary to ensure that you continue to do that. So just because you meet the standards doesn't necessarily mean that you are providing safe drinking water. It's a very much similar role to what your health and safety obligations would be under the Health and Safety Act. If we go to the next slide, please. So suppliers will also, in addition to what you've got up there on the screen, suppliers will also need a source water risk management plan. And that's an important addition. And it also requires the water supplier to work closely with regional councils to make sure that they understand that it's a drinking water supply, and also that the regional council takes that into their decision making when they're thinking about consenting issues. There will be new consumer complaints procedures, so consumers will be able to, I guess, complain to the right people and know how to and where their water comes from. Officers, employees and agents of suppliers must comply with professional due diligence requirements. And again, that's similar to the Health and Safety at Work Act, so that everybody who's got a role in terms of determining how resources or how the organisation goes about providing safe drinking water understands that they're doing that in a way which makes sure that that water continues to be safe. Next slide, please. So local authorities will continue to face significant duties and obligations when water services bill is enacted. Local authorities as drinking water suppliers have a duty to provide safe drinking water, meet drinking water standards, and clear obligations to act when water is not safe or fails to meet those standards. Key provisions in the Act include suppliers need to register with Taumata Arowai. Local authority suppliers need a drinking water safety plan and a source water risk management plan, and water suppliers must give effect to Taumata Arowai. Complying with these requirements is not a status quo, so there is an expectation that increased investment and commitment from local authorities will be needed. General obligations and territorial authorities required to make assessments of drinking water and wastewater in their communities to ensure they have access to safe drinking water. Need to assess drinking water services available to communities at least once every 3 years, including private and community supplies, and a duty to ensure communities have access to safe drinking water. If existing suppliers face significant problems in complying with drinking water standards, they may be required to work with suppliers to identify solutions and step in if a supplier is unable to meet standards, including potentially taking over management and operation of private or community supplies. The next slide here is our role in the wastewater and stormwater space. So this is I guess the suite of tools that we have to make sure that we can keep an eye, I guess, on the regulators, which are regional councils, to make sure that the performance and environmental outcomes that we're seeking from those systems, that we are realising those. So everyone will need to compile wastewater and stormwater networks into a national register. We will set environmental performance measures. We're required to publish an annual report on the performance of wastewater and stormwater systems, and identify promote national good practice. So that's that taking the lead, shining the light role. But the caveat there is regional councils will continue to be the regulator for wastewater and stormwater systems. Okay. And this is a bit more detail on the new source water planning and risk management requirements. So suppliers will need to have a source water risk management plan based on the scale, risk and complexity of the supply. So the larger that is, obviously the more comprehensive and detailed your plan will need to be. Local authorities will have to inform suppliers about risks and hazards to drinking water supplies and undertake actions to address those risks. So that's really that cooperative, connected relationship between the drinking water supplier and the regional councils to make sure that they're collectively managing those risks. The Ministry for the Environment is leading the Source Water National Freshwater Standards from 2022. So they, again, remain to be the policy agency there in that space. And one of the things we're able to develop under the legislation is acceptable solutions. And essentially what an acceptable solution is where we determine a set of criteria where if you apply this, then that's deemed to be meeting your drinking water standards and compliance requirements. We've sent out one acceptable solution draft to local authority chief executives and some other specialist groups in December 2020. They were provided so water suppliers can understand the proposed changes and prepare their own operations accordingly. You can find those at that link there, but I think we can also get them on Taumata Arowai's website, and you'll see that at the end of the slide presentation. We've developed, if we go to the next slide, so we've developed four acceptable solutions which we'll need to consult on. So there's the roof water supplies of less than 500, that's providing for cartridge filter UV systems at buildings, springs and bores of less than 500. When I say less than 500, that's less than 500 consumers. Yeah. Okay. And again, cartridge and UV systems at the headworks and the rural agricultural supplies. There's no population limit on that, but that provides for a cartridge filter and UV systems at each household connected to the supply. So that's an endpoint treatment device, you might call it that. All right. Next slide, please. So where are we at now? Business as usual. So the Ministry of Health is still the drinking water regulator. And until you hear otherwise from Taumata Arowai, all the Ministry of Health requirements still apply. Water services legislation, that's still going through the process at the moment. We expect to see that in the middle of this year, about July, and then we will know what the final look is, and then we can then be a little bit more assured about the information and the expectations in terms of what transition looks like for our water service providers. Okay. So we've been doing some thinking about where we might set up offices around New Zealand in order to provide that frontline regulatory presence. So if you just go to the next slide, please, Gillian. We have landed provisionally on 4 locations: Hamilton, Palmerston, Christchurch and Dunedin. And there's a few reasons we've done that, but overlay that with there will be a presence in Wellington as well. So there will be some functions delivered from Wellington, primarily to our major water suppliers, so our Water Cares, our Wellington Waters, Tauranga City Council, Hamilton City Council, Christchurch City Council, Dunedin City Council, simply because they probably, we understand, require a little bit more technical expertise. We can also have that team in Wellington deployable to support our frontline teams whenever we need to. But the regional officers will be, hopefully, if it works out for us, the intention is to co-locate with regional councils. Important things to remember is we will be advertising shortly. Successful applicants don't necessarily need to live in one of those 4 locations. We're continuing to work through the exact number of people we'll have out in the offices. But again, the thinking is we'll start small and look to build and respond to our resourcing needs. We've mapped those regions against the public health boundaries. There seems to be a bit of synergy there, and in doing it that way also provides a bit of equity in the number of suppliers we would need to regulate in each of those regions. with around 300 in the North Island between the two regions, and around 250 in the South Island between the two regions. It's not intended to be a like for like for what we have now. We're going to address the problem in a more, we are focused on the task we need to deliver under the Water Services Bill, as opposed to perhaps trying to fit it in alongside a health structure, which has a number of competing, resource challenges, on the people there. So it's small, it's fairly conservative to start with, but we're looking to grow over time. And we also want to be able to set up offices where we are reasonably confident that they will remain there. We don't want to employ people, have them in those centres, and then suddenly have to move an office. But when we are ready to advertise, we'll certainly let Water New Zealand know. We'll be able to let you know where those jobs can be found. And if you're in the market looking for a regulatory role, we'd very much like to hear from you. So, in the next slide, please. And the other thing is, I'd ask you to go in and have a look at the Taumata Arowai website. So taumataarowai.govt.nz. So we're now live. You'll be able to find out who Taumata Arowai is and why we've been established. There's the whakapapa stuff up on the...
Not yet, this is signed off by the board, our Māori advisory group.
Okay, so that'll be phase 2. Yeah. Lots and lots of information there. We've had some comments back where people have had lots of questions about drinking water, and they've gone and had a look, and most of their questions have been answered. So please take the time, go in and have a look. We'd really appreciate any feedback. Phase 2, and once the bill is passed, we'll be able to get all the guidance and all the materials, and also we're proposing to have a link where you can access, if you're a drinking water supplier, into the system where you need to register and monitor your details. So I think that's it in terms of the update. I'm now happy to take questions.
So let me just stop sharing for a moment. We had a couple of questions. One came in from Barbara Small. We are a small water supplier. Will there be financial and technical assistance for our scheme to upgrade?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not from Taumata Arowai. There are currently there is some funding, but it's at the moment being coming out of the Three Waters reform, and that's to look at piloting some small schemes that might be able to be put in place to help areas where they don't have access to safe drinking water. But that is very much a question for the Three Waters reform that's currently going, that DIA is leading. We can provide you some links to where you can go to access that information. But at the moment, we're not aware of any financial assistance. Certainly technical assistance is something we will need to work a lot more closely with the sector, because I think sharing that technical expertise and having access to it has been one of the, I guess, the difficulties of the current regime. But how we go about doing that is something that we need to think about, but certainly something that we are looking to address going forward in terms of how do we share the knowledge that we have as an industry, and how do we make it available to people who have small supplies, so that they can, I guess, be better at what they do.
We will share the slides and the recording on Pipeline later this week. And if there are any other bits of links that we think post this conversation that are appropriate, we'll share those as well.
Lovely.
So we've got another question that's come in from Michael Goldingham. Will the Ministry of Health still require annual survey, which happens August to September, if they are not regulated?
For this year, I'm assuming. I would expect so, but that's a question we can ask of Health to get some clarity for you. It would make sense to me to do that if they were finishing that they would leave it in a nice tidy spot, but that's entirely up to the Ministry of Health. And
then there's a follow-up from Michael, which is, what reporting and when will Taumata Arowai require reporting?
Yeah, a good question. So we're just waiting for that bill to go through so that we have some real clarity in terms of what that transition looks like. I think we have another webinar planned for the end of April.
Yep.
Hopefully by that time we'll be able to answer that question. Yeah, with a bit more clarity. But there is an expectation there will be some reporting, but we want to make it as easy for water suppliers to get the information, the important information that we need. I'm not sure whether that's the same as what Ministry Health would be requiring of you.
And then perhaps this is a logical question to follow this up with. Roger's side has asked what key issues and themes have come out of submissions on the water services bill.
Key issues and themes, yeah. Well, there's a big underlying theme about access to marae for the regulator, and that's around warrantless entry. And the bill currently has some provisions, which, if you read them on the face of it, require or could allow entry into dwellings and marae for the purposes of determining whether or not there was a health risk through the provision of unsafe drinking water. There was no expectation that we would do that, so that's certainly creating a lot of debate. Currently the size of the unregulated community is a lot bigger than we expected. So we thought about 5,000. We think that's about 75,000 or more, and currently there's a lot of concern about what that means for those people that have never been regulated before and what are the costs around that. So the provisions in the bill that relate to that are around the definition of what a drinking water supplier is and the size of, I guess, of your network. So how many consumers you are providing drinking water for. What else?
Those are the main things that keep coming through. Yeah. Yeah, entrance onto marae and properties and definition of drinking water supplier. So really those are consistent things. Yeah.
One of the things that with the hearings, if you aren't able to go in person to the ones in when we went to was at Bowen House, you can watch them on Facebook. And if you want to look at yourself making a submission, you can do that too. So we've got another question from Brian Sharman. Have the number and location of regional offices been designed to also support the expected reduction in the number of water suppliers in the water services bill?
Not primarily, no. We anticipate that there will be a reduction. The Three Waters reform has been very clear about that. But it doesn't answer the 75,000 currently unregulated suppliers. So no, even though the entities might get smaller, so we won't have 67 different organisations in local government looking after the suppliers. We may have a smaller number. We still have the same amount of suppliers, so we still need to regulate the suppliers essentially. So that I don't think changes.
The other thing that's come through is around timing. So we're looking at in the bill, we've got a staggered approach to having to register, then to having to start putting things in place. So timing could shift as a result of some of the submissions. Yeah.
Yeah, just that previous question. Yeah. The Three Waters reform and the timing of when we would need those suppliers to come on board is a little bit out of sync. So it would certainly be helpful if you make that happen. And the other thing is a lot of submissions on wastewater and stormwater, and why are we waiting for 2 years? There's a 2-year transition in there. Can we bring that forward? So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of Parliament once they've consulted on that.
Cool. If anybody has got any other questions, please do type them into the Q&A or the chat, and I can ask those. I guess one of the questions that people often ask is what keeps you awake at night?
Yeah.
With the context of Taumata Arowai.
Oh, yeah. It's I think that the 800,000 number at the beginning of that presentation is a big number, and I think that's quite conservative from what I understand now. That's probably up towards nearly the 1 million mark. Yeah, it keeps you awake at night. And if you look at the summer we have had, so Havelock North was 2016. There's probably been a few things between now and then, but if we just look at the summer we've had, we're aware of the problems in Dunedin, so the Waikaiti and Karatani. We're aware of Queenstown with the issues they had down there with arsenic, Akaroa with some of their issues there. So it can happen anywhere, anytime, and it's just the scale which you never really get to know until it happens, right? And that's what keeps me awake at night, is that this could happen and it could affect a large number of people very, very quickly. Often, I guess, you're probably reacting to something that has happened rather than you can prevent it. And changing from that reactionary to that proactive approach, where we've got a duty of care and we set up our systems as a water supplier and as a regulator to try and get ahead of that, is really, really important. And until we get to that space, I think we're in that paradigm where something happens, we're reacting, and it's just the scale of that, which is the scary aspect of that, just the potential to hurt a lot of New Zealanders very, very quickly.
Certainly when we presented at the Select Committee, we showed them statistics from Ministry of Health, and I felt it was a surprise to some of the MPs sitting around the table to actually see the level of compliance with those drinking water standards for different sizes of suppliers. And from our perspective, it was important for us to preface our submission with that information to remind people about why this piece of legislation is going through.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people out there that just do this, can start supplying water in a private scheme. So entry into this space is also another aspect of it could go wrong, it could go horribly wrong. Yeah.
So I've got a question from one of my colleagues who's sitting over there. Leslie Smith is asking, how much attention do you expect Taumata Arowai to play to water supply security? Are water allocations, water efficiency, water loss likely to be on your radar?
The security of supply is really, really important, and that's that 3-year assessment that regional bodies need to do to make sure that they have got water supplies for their communities. I guess that's part of I guess an extension of the work that we do as the water supplier. If you're going to use that for water supply, you're doing things that you need to, but it happens in a much bigger authorising environment, and it's that authorising environment, I think, where most of that happens. Yeah, I don't have an answer specifically for that right now, but I'm imagining if I talk to Katie and Bill, I could probably get one to you to share with you.
Cool, thank you. And I mean, as we said, we will. The aim is to do one either in the last couple of days of April or the first couple of days of May. We just got to sort the diaries out because there's quite a few things happening at the end of April. Another question, Marcus Hyde Hills, chlorination of rural supplies versus chlorination of marae supplies. Different requirements due to cultural reasons. Equal expectations? Question.
Yeah, not because of cultural requirements. No, I mean, the obligation is to provide safe drinking water. And it's quite clear in the bill that residual disinfection and reticulated networks is very important. We're providing an acceptable solution. It doesn't require chlorination. There'd be a reason behind that. I don't have technical expertise to be able to answer that question, but no. There's mechanisms in the legislation where people can apply for exemptions for chlorination, residual disinfection, but those will need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. But where any water supplier can provide water that's safe, and they can prove that they can do that, and they can apply for an exemption. But there's no just because you're marae, you don't have to chlorinate. I think that's the wrong way to look at it.
Question from Jacob France. Are there any requirements in the Water Services Bill for leakage reduction? There is a lot of talk about supplying safe water, but if there is a framework being set up based on the mana of water to mana o te wai, I would imagine that looking after your supply, not losing water through leakage, will be talked about more as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a precious resource, so making sure it gets only to where it needs to go and it's not leaking is really, really important. I think currently there might be a bit of a gap in the legislation in terms of networks, but if you look at it from a risk management perspective, if it's leaking out, then things can get in. And if there's enough of, I guess, an opportunity for the things you don't want in your drinking water to get in, then addressing that as a risk problem would be the right way to go about that. So no, there's nothing specific in the legislation that I think looks at the reticulation requirements and leakage and that sort of thing. But if we were thinking about it in terms of, can you put your hand on your heart and say that yes, you're supplying safe water, knowing that you've got significant leakages which could introduce unsafe drink or cause your drinking water to be unsafe, then you'd have an obligation to do something about that. And we would expect that you would do that. So we would do that through your drinking water safety plan and how you're going about making sure that you know that the water you are delivering at the tap is safe to drink.
Do you think it's likely to be on the radar for your oversight for drinking water? Those are requirements for monitoring from future forward?
Yes, absolutely. I think if we look at the whole water services package, definitely. But I'm not sure in terms of what provisions we have in the Act and how we can enact those in terms of our specific monitoring of leakage or I guess water not outside the system.
My understanding with the current drinking water standards is they're not compatible with the proposed water services bill going forward. And so they're going to turn into MAVs and rules. Do you have any insight onto the timing of when they're likely to come out, when you can consult on those?
Yeah, so we've got some exposure drafts there on the standards and the compliance rules. Yeah, so you can get those at Taumata Arowai on the website.
Yeah.
Also at the DIA link in the presentation. We really want to wait and see what the final bill is and then look to go to consult. But that really depends on, do we see any material change in there, or can we consult on things independently? So we've thought about whether we can consult on the standards and what they're updated with the MAVs, which don't really change a great deal. But then we thought, well, you really need the compliance rules to understand alongside those. So we need to do those two together. We're just waiting to make the call on whether or not it's something we need to wait for the Water Services Bill in its final form, or whether it's something we can push forward. So I'm not clear in my mind whether we're at that point yet. So I can't then say to my leadership team, yes, we can go forward and consult on these. So when I'm satisfied that we can do that, then we'll be out. But we do expect that towards the middle of the year we should be in a position to consult.
So a related question from Sristi Mala, Nelson City Council. When do you think the new operational compliance rules will kick in? So I guess once the bill's gone through and you've consulted and they've been appropriately gazetted, and let's just put some dates out here to make it easier to know. If you take over the reins from the Ministry of Health on the 1st of July, do the operational rules kick in on the 1st of July, or is it a later date? Recognising that all of this is yet to be determined.
Yeah, look, I think, and that's, so we would need to have consulted before July. And from that consultation, we would get a better understanding of how adaptable our water suppliers are to that change. So is that something that they can do quickly, or is it something that they'll need some time and to develop some capability with? Noting as well that we want to be interfacing electronically when we can, so there's some work to be done in that space. But whatever the transitional arrangements are, we'll do it through the consultation process. One of the questions we will be asking is, and how quickly can you then switch over to this new regime? So the first part is to consult, and we want to make sure that we're consulting when we know what the actual landscape looks like, and then it's the transition period. And part of that consultation is, what does that transition period look like? Is it a 6-month period for most water suppliers, or do we actually look at 12 months? And I think you've got a 12-month transition period in from this day here. So those are the questions we're asking ourselves. How long does that transition need to be?
Cool. Okay, another question, Joshua McIndoe. How will you enforce the disinfection residual, chlorine 2, Cl2, in areas that disagree with chlorination?
Yeah, that's real life regulation. So yeah, it's a behaviour change. So if a supplier has availed themselves of, I guess, all of their legal options, applied for an exemption, but couldn't establish that they could do that safely without residual disinfection, it just becomes a requirement. If you're not going to comply with, the law, then there are a number of options within the legislation for us to then think about, as far as the statutory management requirement, where someone else can manage those assets to make sure that they're complying with the law and delivering safe drinking water. At the extreme end, there's also prosecutions of people who are willfully not providing safe drinking water.
But I think it's the conversations
Yeah.
that need to happen that can help people have those conversations with their communities, so that everybody understands the environment that we're all all in, so that ultimately we're all comfortable to pick up the basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's like any other regulatory regime. Some people don't want to do the things because it doesn't suit their particular condition. Let's have that conversation.
Cool. Another one, Ian Martin. Do you have any idea where the economic regulation functions will sit and how will they interact with Taumata Arowai?
No, I don't. For a short point, that's currently with the Three Waters Reform DIA. I'm sure as soon as they're clear on that, they'll be able to communicate it.
There were some slides which I think are probably on the DIA website in terms of the Three Waters workshops, and I can see a like a family tree picture of which there was an economic regulator on one side of the page. So we will check the links on the DI website and make sure that we include them in pipeline.
Or WA.
Yeah. Also that there will be WSMG people who are attending the meeting in New Plymouth. DIA are coming to talk there in terms of the transition issues. And those WUA members on the 28th of April, there will be a similar workshop in Wellington. So encourage you to attend in person to both those events. So another question, Brian Sharman, will there be minimum standards for those thousands of privately owned hotels and guest houses who provide their own supply from roof water and small bores, especially in tourist locations?
Yeah, there will be compliance rules and obligations for everyone who's supplying drinking water, whether they comply with an acceptable solution and they're able to avail themselves of that. That's very good. If not, then the normal rules will apply to them. And I think that's the key thing about the reform is it applies to everyone who supplies drinking water, unless you're supplying your own home from your home source.
Rebecca Fox, what concerns do you have regarding current capability and capacity of the wider water industry to react to the new regulation? What will a qualification lead-in time look like?
Yeah, qualifications, I'll deal with that one first. A long time I would have expected. It takes quite a bit of effort to develop your framework, your capability and qualifications framework, and then design and implement that. And then obviously there's a process of the industry adjusting to what the new requirements would be. Capability in the sector. Look, I think to be fair, if we look at the numbers, about 23% of the population we understand probably doesn't receive drinking water that meets the standards or is being provided by an unregulated entity, which means the other 3/4 are getting reasonable drinking water. So I think there's a level of capability that the industry has developed, whether they've shared that knowledge and capability across the industry. We could argue whether that's been as effective as it could be, but there is a lot of knowledge and there is a lot of expertise in the industry, and by and large, that 3/4 has done a reasonable job on their own, given the failings that were uncovered through the Havelock North inquiry. So I think it's just about harnessing it and then thinking about how we work in a more collaborative, collective way, so that everybody, can, I guess, can access some of that expertise and share that knowledge. Because I know in our reference groups, certainly, that we're using to look at some of the initiatives and some of the work we're doing in setting up and getting prepared to deliver the regulatory function for Taumata Arowai. There's a lot of people with a lot of knowledge. It's just making sure that we know where they are, and that organisations like Water New Zealand, we have plumbers and gas fitters, and there's lots of different entities. We've got our Crown Research or research facilities, universities. There's a bunch of expertise and knowledge out there. When I look at it, it's just being able to harness that, and I think that's the biggest challenge for us is how do we unlock that potential. But I think there's a lot there.
Cool, thank you. Roger side, what environmental performance measures are being considered for stormwater and wastewater networks?
None at the moment. We're still waiting to see the bill, what the final form is that and how quickly we need to respond to that. But yeah, that's certainly something we'll need to think of directly when we understand what that task for Taumata Arowai looks like.
Okay, Jim McGibbon, I've already seen a fair amount of scaremongering about water freedom anti-chlorination groups, mainly aimed at what they perceive as an infringement of their personal choices. In the age of disinformation, have Taumata Arowai given thought to how to get the facts across to the general public, either by Q&A sessions or social media?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we're certainly looking at a plan to communicate out to the sector and through many different channels, and social media being one of them. So yeah, we want to ensure that we're informing everyone, and so that the speculation and people filling in the blanks doesn't happen. So we're looking to be out with some good engagement and updates for what we can say before the bill becomes an act. And so we're sort of doing a bit of a staggered approach with messaging, but there should be something coming out sort of end of April, a bit of a campaign, and we'll be using social media. Yes, yeah.
Cool, thank you. One from Aslai Crawford. Would there be consideration for sustainable water source, for example, water reuse in some industries to start with?
Not that I'm aware of.
It's a tricky one because I know that Auckland are certainly looking at wastewater as being a possible source of drinking water going forward. My thought is that, yeah, it probably does need to be on your radar, but you've got so much on your workload just yet. Just when do you think you might tackle that one? Yeah.
Yeah, and remember, whenever we look at something, we've got to always factor into why. Okay, and there's some really important Māori considerations we would really need to think of, and be, take advice, I guess, from Māori generally around that, but also that's an area where our Māori advisory group, I imagine, will play quite a big part, because depending on what you're reusing, has some pretty important cultural impacts as well.
Question from India. Is there any consideration for the process a water supplier may need to go through when they're forced into using a source water which is not fresh water, and the associated water treatment processes? Continuation.
Yeah.
Something like, I probably should read all the questions the whole way through before I ask them. Desalination from seawater, reverse osmosis for wastewater reuse.
Same question. Not just yet. Yeah.
Yeah, if it doesn't flow across land, it's very hard to get across for culturally, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Susanna Cullen, another question. What do you want to see from our existing water industry professionals? So whether we're talking engineers, operators, construction, strategy, planning, etc., to adapt to meet the changes as we all move forward?
Yeah, what do I want to see from them? Oh, look, this is it's the best opportunity we've had. I can't say it's once in a lifetime. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm not too good at fortune telling, but I think this is an opportunity we all need to grab. We need to be open, and we need to think of solutions, because we've got the ability now in a framework that's looking very good in terms of where it currently is. In terms of its main features, I can't see those changing too dramatically through the parliamentary process. So there's an opportunity for a better way of doing things, and now it's time to, I guess, connect with your colleagues, reach out, start thinking about what opportunities there are in front of the industry, things that the regulator can help with, but also what our professional organisations like Water New Zealand, what else is out there for us to do differently. So yeah, embrace the change, but also grab the opportunity. Yeah.
And collaboration is key, isn't it? Yeah.
So certainly in terms of, you know, I guess from my perspective, engagement is critical. So, you know, to everybody on the webinar today, or people who will listen to it later on, you know, if there are things that you would like Water New Zealand to be doing to support the sector as we transition through to the new regulatory regime, and then obviously once it's underway, please do get in contact. You know, all of our emails are on our website, and you know, our phone numbers are there as well. But you know, don't hesitate. We're keen to hear from you. Essentially, one other question. I've only got one left, so if you want to ask a question in the last 8 minutes, please get it in. The one that's there that I haven't asked is from Martin Simpson. How will the cessation of permanent boil water notices be enforced?
How will the cessation of permanent boil water notices be enforced? I'm not sure I understand the question entirely.
At the moment, you've got a lot of failed water suppliers out there that they're on permanent boil water notices. How do you get rid of those boil water notices?
Yeah, well, that's part of the performance uplift, really, isn't it? I wonder whether those people that have those schemes necessarily have the expertise or can understand how to get get out of that cycle. I'm not sure. I don't understand this. You know, I'm not aware of the specifics for each situation. But again, it's a capability. It's bringing the expertise to bear. But also, I think with the way that the water supply now needs to interact with the regional authorities and or local authorities means that there's a better understanding of issues. Maybe some of the causes that require or end up in those boil water notices being there can be dealt with, and long-term solutions can be brought about. But yeah, it's a difficult one. You know, taking a water source away from someone is just as bad as giving them unsafe water. We all need water. Those long-standing boil water notices are real issues that we need to confront, like we do with all of the other issues in the sector. So understanding what the problem is, finding the right people to bring their minds to how we might make those problems disappear will be a crucial role, and that's part of the leadership role that Taumata Arowai has. One of those things that forces us to get out of the four corners of the statute. So I don't have a magic answer to that. That again comes down to that real life regulation. What's the problem and how do we go about fixing this?
It's that duty of care too, the water services bill, to be a water supplier, understand the risks. And if you've got a boil water notice, then really it's a failed water supply. So you can't have that fail all the time. And it's one of the conversations we had with some people in the industry going, okay, would Taumata Arowai by itself prevent another event from occurring in New Zealand? And probably not, but that duty of care and raising that and shifting the culture within the industry, that's going to have an effect as well as regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the regulator's got a role, but everybody in the industry has a role as well. And it's that collectiveness and that collaboration, and as I said, grab that opportunity to make things better. Yeah.
There's a follow-up sort of question, which from Brian Sharman, who says, or comments really, some of the reasons for using boil water notices are more financial than capability driven, hence the link with the financial regulation. And I guess that's perhaps picking up on a comment from Barbara Small right at the beginning of the session when she said, will there be financial and technical assistance for small schemes to upgrade?
This is the Three Waters Review and how the two sort of go together, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of it, right? So if the infrastructure is not fit for purpose, then it's really difficult to do your bit as the water supplier to make sure that water's safe.
The third pole.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, one of the things that Water New Zealand is trying to do is to be able to lift the understanding across the sector and for those people who are interacting with the water sector. So one of the pieces that we've just launched the beginning of last week, I think, weeks merging, was the Drinking Water 101 digital badge. And the intent of that badge is that that learning process is that we are introducing you to drinking water. So a bit about the history, a bit about some of the cultural aspects. You can see there's some videos where Troy is talking about some of the cultural aspects. Noel is talking about some of the historical incidents that have happened in New Zealand and about the way that you can treat drinking water. You'll see videos of the Waikanae treatment plant with people explaining what they do on a day-to-day job. At the end of that badge, the idea is not that we'll let you loose with a drinking water treatment plant, but it is that hopefully you will all have had, or people who do it will have had a greater understanding afterwards. And we all know what it's like when you get new people come and join you in an organisation and they don't know anything about drinking water. You want to upskill them, and so this was our, as a start of that process from our side. We will look to do a similar one in terms of wastewater and stormwater. So look out on our website. The second cohort starts on the 6th of April. Thank you. Now, I don't have any other questions other than one from Rory Menzies about when will we send the slides through. The slides will be on our website. They will certainly be there by the time Pipeline goes out on Thursday, as will a copy of this recording. And we will make sure that it's available such that whether you're a member or a non-member, that you are able to access it. Good to see comments from Roger saying thank you for your time, good session. So if we, and from Brian, if there's no other questions, given that we are at 11:58, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Ray and to Sarah and to Marianne who could come here today. Hopefully.
Thanks, Gillian. Yeah, it was great. And yeah, something we should do regularly now. Certainly coming out of COVID, everyone's a little bit more savvy around technology. So yeah, we look to be here next month, whether it's April or whether it's beginning of May, with some further updates.
Yeah. So look, absolutely. So and as I said before, any questions, I'm happy to have them fired at us, and we'll find the right person to answer it. So thank you. Thank you.
Very good. I'll just finish with a couple of keys. Tuia I runga, tuia I rau, tuia I roto, tuia I rau. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te au. Haumi e hui e. Tai.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Ka kite anō.
Yes, ka kite anō.